you try to divide the great state of New York, we will stand up tall. We will stand up unified. We will stand up and we will fight. And we will win because we are right. And that is the New York way.
Good evening and welcome to Metro Focus. I'm Jack Ford. It has been quite the start to the new year for Governor Andrew Cuomo. The New York Democrat rang in 2020 by coming to the rescue of a man whose van had tipped over on the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. Roadside heroics that drew both praise and, this being New York, some degree of skepticism. The governor also unveiled dozens of proposals this week, including one that would add 8 new tracks to Penn Station, accommodating thousands of extra riders. And he, of course, delivered his annual State of the State address on Wednesday, outlining his priorities for 2020. For a closer look at the governor's big speech and what's ahead this legislative session in Albany, we're pleased to be joined now by Karen DeWitt, Capitol Bureau Chief for New York State Public Radio. She's also a regular contributor to WMHT's award-winning public affairs program, New York Now. Karen, it's a delight to have you with us, and Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, great to talk to you, Jack. Happy New Year.
So let's start off with your impressions, if you would, your headlines about the governor's State of the State speech, and then you and I will get into some of the details.
Well, you know, I think that it was one of his better speeches. As you could see in the clip, it was pretty well received. He focused a lot on hate crimes and combating bigotry because there's just been a scourge of anti-Semitic attacks in New York City, and it's been very upsetting to a lot of people, of course. The rabbi whose home was attacked in Muncie, the stabbing incident that 5 people were injured, including the rabbi's own son, also spoke just before Governor Cuomo gave his speech, and that was very moving. And the rabbi talked about resiliency, how even though they had this terrible attack, they continued to celebrate Hanukkah and what is good about life, and hoping that they can overcome all of this. In terms of proposals, the governor talked about, expanding free college tuition, directing education aid to poor schools instead of rich schools, the adult use of recreational marijuana, he'd like to see that legalized, and a $3 billion environmental Bond Act. So pretty socially liberal and pretty well received by the Democratic state lawmakers who dominate state government these days.
All right, so we put a lot on the table. Let's start with the idea of the hate crimes and what's been taking place. And you mentioned the emotions that were part of the speech that the governor gave. What sort of proposals, hard proposals, do you anticipate are going to be contemplated?
Well, the governor wants to create a new crime of domestic terrorism. I mean, it might be surprising to people that that already is not a specific crime, but they want to put that into law and give prosecutors and law enforcement more tools to combat these crimes that are motivated by hate. I don't think that he's going to have any problem getting that through the state legislature. But the governor also said he'd like to change school curriculum so that school children are better educated about, what it means to be tolerant and accept all people in society.
What about the idea of legalizing marijuana? Where do we appear to be here in the state of New York?
Well, I think that does have a better chance of passage this year. As you might remember, it was a proposal last year. It failed in the budget, and it failed as a standalone proposal because there weren't enough votes. Even though the Democrats dominate in the Senate, there weren't enough Senate Democrats who were willing to go out on a line and vote to legalize marijuana. There's a number of Democrats in the New York City suburbs, Long Island and Westchester, where legalizing marijuana isn't as popular as New York City and upstate. So in the end, they kind of choked and they didn't want to vote for it. And I think the hope is that if it's in the budget this year, it'll be easier for them to vote for it as a package. Plus, it's going to bring in revenues for the state, an estimated $300 million in revenue from the sale of cannabis, and that will help because we have a giant budget deficit this year.
You get me exactly to where I want to go next, which is the giant budget deficit. And there was something a little bit unusual this year that the governor sort of bifurcated the process. You had the State of the State address, but you also had him rolling out budget proposals in a separate process, if you will. What's unusual about that, and how do you think that reflects that $6 billion budget gap?
Well, Jack, I've covered state government for more years than I care to admit. And traditionally, there was a state of the state followed in 2 weeks by the budget, because for so many years they always had problems with the budget. So the state of the state was the good news, where the governor could say all the wonderful things he wanted to do, and then in 2 weeks it would be the bad news of, well, guess what? We don't have any money, and this is what we're going to have to do to pay for it. So Governor Andrew Cuomo, during the years where we had a budget surplus, he did both of the things combined into one address. But now I think he wanted one day where he didn't have to get all the headlines about the $6 billion budget deficit, and he could get headlines about, all the other things that we're talking about. But yeah, in 2 weeks, they're going to have to deal. The governor's going to have to put out a plan. How is he going to make up for what is largely due to a overspending or an increase in spending in the Medicaid budget in health care? And it's going to be very difficult for them to cut money to hospitals and nursing homes. At the same time, there's not really an appetite for increasing taxes. Certainly the progressive Democrats would like to tax the rich more, but Governor Cuomo doesn't want to do that. And actually the Senate Democratic leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, isn't all that crazy about raising any taxes this year.
What about the environment? What sort of proposals would you anticipate, and what sort of challenges do you think they will meet up in Albany?
Well, it's a $3 billion environmental bond act, mostly to deal with climate change, to restore floodplains and wetlands. There's a lot of dams that are in very bad condition, infrastructure, and also repair damage from all of the terrible storms we've had over the last decade. But see, that doesn't cost any money right now. Certainly taxpayers have to pay for it eventually because it's borrowing money, but it wouldn't put any more money into the current state budget. So I think that is going to be a popular one. I anticipate that lawmakers will probably approve that, and then they would hope that voters would approve it in November, and that gives them some money in a tight budget year to pay for a number of environmental things. They don't have to worry about coming up with the money for that, at least not anytime soon.
We know that there have been some recent changes to the criminal laws with regard to bail and the idea of essentially doing away with bail for a significant number of criminal offenses. And yet there's some questions being raised now about specifically talking about hate crimes. What are we hearing from the governor, and what do you expect that the conversation will be in Albany about that?
Yeah, that happened as of January 1st. Most forms of cash bail no longer exist. And what's been controversial is there's been some repeat offenders who have been let out on their own recognizance, including one in this area, a serial bank robber who robbed 3 banks, was convicted, accused of robbing a 4th bank, was released. In New York City, there was a woman who was accused of slapping 2 Jewish women. She was released on her own recognizance, went out, and now is accused of slapping somebody else. And so people are kind of jarred by that, and there has been a backlash. Governor Cuomo didn't say it in his State of the State speech, but he gave a speech to the business group in New York City on Monday, and he said, maybe we do need to make some changes. Certainly, the more left-wing Democrats don't want to do that, but I think the more moderate Democrats are pressing right now to maybe walk this back a little bit, allow judges to have more discretion if they have a defendant before them who's a repeat offender or who might be a danger to society, that they could say, yes, we want to set a high level of bail so that this person really does come back to court or possibly is incarcerated until their trial. So, yeah, that's something that I think we are going to see happen in the early months of the session.
Last quick question for you, and this is another bigger picture question, if you will. We saw, as you mentioned, the reaction to the governor's speech in some instances looked like it was a campaign rally. But we know, it being Albany, that even when one party has control of everything, the Democrats here, it's never really smooth sailing. What's your anticipation in terms of the cooperation that the governor is going to get from his side of the aisle for many of these suggestions and proposals?
Well, I think there is going to be some tension between the more progressive wing of the party and Governor Andrew Cuomo's moderate wing. But I do think that they probably will hang together, at least publicly. When you had, Republicans in one branch of government, they might fight more publicly and call each other names. I think a lot of the fighting will be behind the scenes as they try to decide how they're going to close this big deficit without offending any, major group like the hospitals or the healthcare workers union or things like that.
Well, there will be a lot on the table, and as we know, as we said before, this being Albany, it'll always be interesting. Karen, thank you so much. We're so delighted to have you here with us, and we're going to look forward to getting you back again. You've done a great job of explaining this all for us. So you be well. We'll look forward to talking with you again soon.
Great, thanks.